Hello, everyone. We kind of, in some ways, lucked out with getting a day off, but in other ways, it makes things a little tougher because we're supposed to be getting into the writing of your papers. So I thought I would do a very, very brief class here, about 15 minutes, I hope, to make sure you're well on your way to working on those papers this weekend. Outlines are due Thursday. And then we have a 3-page draft due next week, so you need some of this information. But first, some real quick review. Don't forget, if you're having trouble finding sources, make sure you're using PicCat Plus. Use abstracts to save time. If you find an article you like, look at the reference pages. That can help you locate more resources. And I'm not sure if Mr. Ross is there with the closing of the school, but if he is, go visit Mr. Ross. And then don't forget, if you need just some basic info about your country for any reason, CIA Factbook is a really good resource. Okay, so a little bit more review. We will get into new stuff very shortly. So we talked about acceptable paraphrases. Make sure to record the information accurately. Give credit for the ideas using citation, even if it's in your own words. Indicates what part is taken from a source. So if you need the unique phrasing, put it in quotation marks and make sure to get the page number. You need the page number. You also make sure put a citation on every sentence, not just at the end of 2, 3, 4 sentences, but on every sentence that comes from a source. And you'll see if you're putting too many citations down, that means you're not following the paragraph format that we went over. So I recommend it as far as strategies to paraphrase, that you read thoroughly a document and then minimize it, write it in your own words, and then pull that document back up. Make sure you're not using unique phrasing from it. And make sure you put a citation with the last name and page number, right? So that's a strategy for avoiding plagiarism while using paraphrasing. We also talked about common knowledge, that if about 25% of UPT students would know it, that constitutes common knowledge and you can use it, but also it doesn't say it here, but it should. It also needs to be right, so make sure the information is correct, and it doesn't replace research. It just can be in addition to research you're already doing. So we went over evidence, analysis, evaluation, and judgments just really quick. You can read over the actual definitions. But as far as evidence for your papers, it will be quotes, statistics, paraphrases, testimonials, or similar, right? So that's your evidence. You're building a court case. You need evidence, and the more evidence you have, the better your case, right? And then analysis is taking that evidence, going in front of the court and breaking it down, explaining why it's important, what does it mean, right? So you have your evidence, you need to explain it to your reader. Pretend that your reader needs to know what that evidence means. They haven't done all the reading you've done, so explain it to them. Then evaluation, how does it connect to the bigger picture, the subject, the thesis, how does it connect to the topic overall? So now, and then at the end of each section of your paper, make sure to have some judgments. You can weave them into your paragraphs, which we'll look at in a moment. But so you have your evidence, you're explaining it to the court, you're connecting it to the larger case, and now you need to make some judgments based on all that, your closing of the case. Okay, so this is how each paragraph should look. This is review, but again, we'll get to new stuff in a moment. And this says sentence 1, but it's more the order I'm worried about. Sometimes you can have 2 sentences for an introduction, that's fine. 2 sentences for your evidence, that's fine. Analysis and evaluation often goes more than 1 sentence. But this focus of this should be the order. So your first sentence should be an introduction to the idea being discussed. If you read just the first sentence of any one of your paragraphs, you should be able to, the reader should know what that entire paragraph is going to be about, right? So it's your topic or introduction sentence. Your second sentence should be evidence. And remember that every piece of evidence needs a little piece of you. If you're paraphrasing, then that's fine. That's part from you. if you're using a quote, there needs to be a little clause, a little piece of you leading into that quote. Okay, I'll show you some examples of that. Then you analyze the evidence. What's it mean? Why is it important? And you evaluate, connect it to the bigger picture. Often you can combine evaluation with what's called maintaining your thesis. So the last sentence of every paragraph should connect back to your thesis in some way, right? But sometimes you can combine evaluation with connecting back to the thesis, and that's fine. I'll show you some examples of that. I recommended a strategy for how to do analysis and evaluation. I said, take your evidence and highlight the most important parts of your evidence, and then explain to your reader why it's important that somebody's taking the groundwater. What's that mean? Why is it important? Why is it important that they're landless laborers? So we in class discussed that means they have no power, and you need to explain that to your reader, that because they have no power, this and this and this are important, right? And so on. So this is what I recommended, that you highlight the important parts, you break it down for the reader, explain what it means, connect it to your thesis or larger idea through evaluation, okay? And what I recommend is when you do this, you free write, right? So you free write that analysis and evaluation, and then you take that free write and formalize it into more formal paper language into your paragraphs. Okay, so now to the new stuff. I want to look at your handout packets. And page 9, right? So page 9 is your Bible. This is what I just went over. If you keep this by you and follow it exactly, you should do well on our papers, right? So it has the definitions we just went over. It has the sentence structure or of your paragraph structure, right? And it has an example here. So just this is the example that I was talking about. You have your introduction sentence. Then you have evidence, right? And that's how MLA citation should look, last name and page number. But you notice the evidence is here, and there's a little clause leading into the evidence. Every single quote needs that little clause from you to support it. It could be as simple as according to Dories, comma, and then your quote, okay? Now let's look at some student examples. I think these are helpful to see what this actually looks like in practice. So again, that introduction sentence should give you an idea of the entire paragraph. You could, if you just stopped at that first sentence, you'd know generally what that paragraph's about. So the introduction sentence of every paragraph in your paper, except the introduction and the conclusion, is the United States Animal Welfare Act focuses on the mistreatment of animals. Okay, so generally you know this paragraph's going to be about a law that protects the mistreatment of animals, right? So her next sentence is evidence. And you can see in this case she has a quote, right? And you see the MLA citation again, last name and page number. But importantly, every time you have a quote, you need a piece of you, something from you leading into that quote. So she says, these laws put into place address 3 ways unnecessary animal suffering can occur. And she goes through those 3 ways in the evidence, or the evidence explains that, right? Through experimentation, inappropriate handling, etc. So then she breaks down that evidence for a reader. She explains what's this means, why is this important. She's read 14 articles on this topic, so she has more context than a reader has. She needs to break it down for them. So the way she breaks it down is scientific justification in an experiment is important to reduce the number and unnecessary suffering of lab animals. Inappropriate handling or housing animals will also contribute to unnecessary suffering of the animals and could skew results, right? So she's explaining the importance of that information she just gave the reader. Then she needs to connect it to the bigger idea and maintain her thesis, so connect back to her thesis. So she says the Animal Welfare Act contributes to 3R principles, something she talked about in a previous paragraph, and her thesis, as it reduces the mistreatment and suffering of lab animals for medical research. So again, she has her general topic sentence. She has her evidence with a little bit of her leading into that quote. She breaks it down. Why is it important? What's it mean to her reader? And then she connects it to a larger idea in the thesis. Okay. Let's look at one more example, two more examples here. This is going to be talking about the CNSA, which is the Chinese version of NASA. So the first sentence, again, if you read just first sentences, you should have an idea what that paragraph is about. In this case, when it comes to space, NASA doesn't do military practices. When NASA was founded, it was meant for peaceful space research. Okay, so you have a general idea of what that paragraph is going to be about. Now we have our evidence, and in this case, he does something a little different, and this is perfectly acceptable. First of all, he does paraphrasing and is careful not to use unique language, and he cites it, right? But then what he does is he says there's a couple little pieces of evidence that all stick together, and he wants to put them together here. So he does 1, 2, 3 little sentences of evidence. I would say that is the max amount of evidence you want in a paragraph, right? And it's perfectly acceptable to combine little pieces like that as long as you fully analyze them and evaluate them, right? There can't be evidence that doesn't have analysis. Okay, so in this case, he says the CNSA does both civilian and military, with military being the leading force. So the Chinese military leads their space exploration. Since the CNSA is two-tiered on civilian and military, it's secret on which of them is really in control. So you could see those pieces of evidence being tied together, right? NASA, on the other hand, has been purely for civilian research and to benefit mankind. Again, he's weaving together these pieces of evidence that clearly go together, and then he's going to break it down for his reader. He says this is important, so he specifically says this is important because, right? You can do that, just make sure not to get too repetitive with that. You can try to rephrase that and put it more subtly, right? But he says this is important because this could be one of the reasons that the U.S. doesn't want to partner with the CNSA. It could also cause very different research in space, which could divide the CNSA and NASA even more. In the grand scheme of things, it could cause problems down the line for both space programs. If they assist each other, it would cause less tension. So he's explaining this to the reader. He has 3 pieces of evidence there, so you notice he has a few more sentences of analysis. Now, you do got to be careful here, okay? I say a paragraph should be no more than half a double space page. So when you double space this, he's pushing that a little bit, right? But this is okay. Just don't go beyond this. This is pushing it. So he explains it to his reader. Now he connects it to the bigger idea in the thesis. This seems to be the main reason the United States bans cooperation with the CNSA. So if the CNSA would be mainly civilized space, then NASA and CNSA would be able to work together, right? So he's tying it all together and connecting back to his thesis, which is very close to this sentence, actually. Let's look at a third and final example here. So we have an introduction sentence again. You should have a general idea of what the paragraph's going to be about from that introduction sentence. Comprehensive sex education is a right that should be taught in every school. Okay, again, general statement. Gives you a clue what the whole paragraph's going to be about. In this case, she decides she needs 2 sentences for the introduction. Completely fine. I wouldn't go beyond 2. 2's a fair amount. When not taught properly, teenagers may engage in risky sexual behaviors that result in pregnancy and STDs, right? So, again, her introduction sentence goes into 2. That's fine. I wouldn't go beyond 2. She then gets to her evidence. She actually goes into 3 here. So that is pushing it on introduction, but it worked for her here. It is pushing it a bit. So then she goes with her evidence, and she has her quote, right? But she needs that little piece of her, something from her, leading into that quote. So she has according to Santelli, comma, and then her quote. Access to complete and accurate STI, HIV/AIDS, and reproductive and sexual health information is a human right and essential to realizing that human right is good for your health, basically, right? Now, because she had the person's name in the sentence, she can just put the page number at the end, right? Now she needs to break down that information for the reader, explain what's it mean, why is it important. She says the current policies in the US and Japan do not effectively teach students safe sex options, just that they should avoid sex altogether, which is not an answer. It causes more harm than it does good, leading to unintended consequences such as pregnancy and STDs. And then she combines her evaluation and maintaining her thesis all in one sentence and does it effectively. The purpose of sex education is not to encourage teens to go out and have sex, but to inform them how to safely practice it. So we have general introduction. She's pushing it a little bit with 3 sentences. We have her evidence with a little piece of her leading into it. She breaks it down, explaining why it's important, what it means, and then connects it to the bigger idea or thesis. Okay. Now, I'm not going to go into this because I want to keep this video short, but if you're starting to write, you'll want to make use of this next page, page 11. It's General MLA in-text citation rules. Okay, I'll do the quick version now, and we'll look into it more when we come back. So it's author's last name and page number in parentheses is the general rule for citation, right? So it looks like this. And notice the period comes after the parentheses. Last name and page number. If you establish a source like this one, Dories 7, and you're quoting the same source in the next sentence, then you can just use the page number. But once you start a new paragraph, you got to make sure to put the last name again. Okay. Now, if you have more than one author, what we have down here is basically examples. So if you have 3 authors, it goes author, author, and author, and then page number. So it looks like this: Smith, Jones, and Dories, 51. Notice period comes after. If there is not an author, use title and page number. This shouldn't happen too much for you because most of your sources should be academic journals. But it would look like this. So the title of the article and the page number. Notice period goes after the citation. If there's more than 3 authors, use the following. Use the first author, and then the phrase et al, and the page number. Okay. We'll go over this more when we come back. I'm doing the quickie version so that if you're writing, you can know how to go about that, okay? But the main thing I want you to focus on is finishing up your outlines for tomorrow night, Thursday night, and then starting analysis and evaluation and forming paragraphs, okay? I may send you another video this weekend for those of you that are working on this. I'm not sure, but I think this should get you off to a good start. Thanks. Have a good weekend and stay warm.